Okay, well, thank you for coming. My name's Mark Callan. I work in the School of Biosciences. I'm Professor of Microbial Genomics there. Before I start, I should give some caveats. This is my personal view. It's not officially endorsed by the School of Biosciences, the College of Life and Environmental Sciences, by the University of Birmingham. So if I say anything that's slightly risque, it's my fault, and I'm indemnified. The other point is that this is my own particular view from working in the biomedical sciences. I'm particularly working with research councils like the BBSRC and the MRC. So some of the things I say may not apply to other funding streams, to other disciplines. The third thing I'd say before I start is that I'm recording this and I'll put it up onto YouTube hopefully in the next day or two. So anyone who's not here can listen to it. You can get your friends to listen to it back home. If you've got a smartphone, you can actually download the slides by clicking on there now. And if you want to find out about me, you can also use that QR code there to do that. So this is a bit out of date. I didn't update it. This was when I gave it last year. Basically, these are my credentials. Since that was written, one of my grants has gone off, has now finished, but I've got major funding from the NIHR as part of a consortium, not just in my own right. We've got a £10 million grant that we've got from NIHR between the university, the Royal Centre for Defence Medicine, and UHB Trust, and I've got about between 1.5 and 2 million of that is allocated to my research. So as I say, this is a little bit out of date. I just started trying to, I've forgotten I'd actually put that in. I started putting in that NIHR grant. But, the BBSRC grant there, the second BBSRC grant is now expired. That expired at the end of February, the end of January. So I've got quite a lot of money, I think. I think I'm doing all right. I reckon I probably get about half of the proposals that I submit, which is about twice as much as the kind of average for people. So that's all. I mean, I don't get every grant. There are some people that get every grant that they apply for. Steve Busby in my school told me he'd got every proposal funded that he'd ever put in until he put in one with me, and then he didn't get it. So there are people that do get everything. Now, why bother with grants? Why bother to go and write grant proposals? Well, it allows you to employ experienced staff. So if you try and do your research just out of what you can do yourself, or out of project students, or even out of PhD students, there's only so much you can do, and you're spending so much time just doing basic stuff that you can easily get bogged down, plus a bit of teaching. You never really progress as far as you'd like. Whereas once you've got grant funding, you can get a postdoc in, and you can actually get that postdoc to do work, and you'd expect them to have a certain degree of autonomy, more autonomy than you'd expect of a project student and even of a PhD student. Gives you continuity in your research. You're more likely to get referable papers, I think, if you have grant funding. And I think if you look at kind of league table-y things about who's got the most papers with the highest impacts, there's usually a good correlation with their grant income. There are a few people who manage to get wonderful papers without any grant income, so it's not an absolute rule. In my own school, Susanna Thorpe has, I think, she got one science paper and one PNS paper in recent years, but she's not got megabucks. I think she's got very modest grant income. So, it's not absolutely the case, but it's more likely that the more resource you get in terms of funding, the more chance you have got to get good papers. Basically, it pays for all your reagents, so you can actually, the university doesn't give us money to do research. So if you're particularly in laboratory-based research where you need reagents to actually do anything, you get the money, you get equipment. The equipment belongs to your research group, to you, belongs to the university formally, but obviously it stays in your lab after that project finishes, generally, and you can use it for other purposes. Adrian's going to say a little bit about the way in which the rules about equipment have changed in recent years, so it's not, the university has to match fund and so forth. It's a bit more complicated than it used to be, but nonetheless, if you get equipment off grants, it's a valuable thing that you can keep for a long time. It also allows you to pay for travel. So you can actually get funds to go to conferences because you're expected to present your work at conferences. Obviously, you go to the conference to present your work, but you also get lots of other benefits from having that funding to go to the conference. You can listen to all the other talks and learn what's going on in your discipline. And if the conference is in a nice place, you can have a holiday on the side as well. So there's all these benefits you get from having grants. Of course, the main thing is you get respect. You know, anyone who's kind of over 45 will remember this character here from the 1980s. Loads of money, his name was, you know, basically the whole issue is that having money in the lab gets you respect because you've persuaded referees and you've persuaded the panel of experts of your merit, and so it's not unreasonable to say if someone's got a lot of grant money, they must be pretty good because they've gone through that trial by fire of getting the funding in. And it's good for your university if you get grant funding. It's good for your school and your college. Under the RE, under the REF, money earns money in a sense. It's not quite as much as it used to be. In the early incarnations of the REE, the amount of money you got in really did have a big effect on the amount of money that the university gets. Now I think it's much less so, but there is still an expectation that the more money a place has, the more money it's got through this kind of approach, the more money it will get through the REF process. Overheads trickle down through the institution, so in some schools and colleges you get overheads. But of course, from the person, this is where I'm talking as a person, not as a part of the institution. Personally, of course, you get leverage when you get that grant money because you then become an exportable commodity. So if you're a starting lecturer and you've been here a while and you want to complain about your situation, you don't like your office or you don't like something, and you say, oh, I'm going to go and work at the University of Warwick. If you've got no grants, they'll say, so what? Clear off. If you've got loads of grants, they'll say, oh my goodness, if you go, we'll lose all that grant income, and they'll be much more responsive to your needs. So it's very, you know, it is important. And what I say to young lecturers, say, when you go for your first job, you might have to make a compromise and go anywhere in the country that will allow you to get your first BBSRC grant, even if it's hundreds of miles from where your friends and family are. But once you've got that first BBSRC grant, then you can apply to a university nearby, and they'll say, this guy's got money, or this girl's got money, and they'll let you in. Sort of thing. The other thing is that the more grant funding you have, and particularly now with full economic costing, that grant funding is covering part of your salary as well. It means that you can go to, in your personal best or other appraisal things, and they want to dump loads of teaching on you. You can say, I can't possibly take on 5 new modules because 50% of my salary is paid out of grants, and I have to supervise this group, and I really am responsible to the BBSRC for delivering on that. And it's completely unreasonable of you to expect me to become health and safety officer, admissions officer, and 5 new modules. It's just not going to be possible. Whereas, conversely, if you have no grants, then you might expect those horrible little tasks to come dumped down on top of you. So, what about getting money? So you have to go and choose the right funding body and the right scheme. There are websites out there, MRC, BBSRC, all those funding bodies. They have their own websites. They have news on there. There's research news. We still have that, don't we? Yeah. I should know that, shouldn't I? But you can read the research news, and it'll tell you about the latest scheme. Try and work out, you're doing research in a particular area, try and work out what is the best scheme, what is the best panel for you, and start tailoring your thoughts in that direction. You should be Machiavellian about this. Don't let events dictate things. You should be in control. You should think to yourself, right, okay, so I've decided that I want to work on pigs, and I want to work out on the gastrointestinal tract of pigs. So I need to go and find out. So that goes to that panel in the BBSRC. Who sits on that panel? Oh, look, that guy there is being seconded from the pig marketing board. Okay, I have to get inside his head and work out how he thinks about this. You know, you have to do all that stuff. And you have to work out who's going to introduce your proposal and what sort of take they're going to have on it. It's much better if you can find a call for proposals in an area which you are competent to work in than to just send in your proposal in what we call responsive mode. So the BBSRC, for example, will put out calls for proposals in certain areas every now and then. And if your research matches one of those, you're much better off just dropping what you're doing and say, oh, I must get something into that, than waiting until just the next normal deadline for grants. And I don't think I'm breaking any confidences here to say that I've said this several times before, but the point was rammed home to me last week where there was a synthetic biology panel which I sat on for the BBSRC, and they funded 14 out of 22 proposals that were submitted to them, so which is an astonishing success rate. Much, much better than you'd ever expect to get if you went in responsive mode. So that's a general rule, is if they're asking for research on, if there's a call that says we are deliberately asking for research on the gastrointestinal tracts of domestic animals and you want to work on then that's it, you go for that proposal. You have to recruit appropriate collaborators and co-applicants. So let's say I wanted to work on the gastrointestinal tract of pigs. They'd look at my track record and say, this guy knows nothing about pigs. He's never worked with pigs in his whole life. He's not a pig expert at all. Okay, he knows a little bit about the gastrointestinal tract of chickens, but he knows nothing about pigs. So I have to get someone in who is a pig expert who can mitigate that criticism. So you get a collaborator or a co-applicant to come in and okay, so this is the guy who wrote the latest review article on the gastrointestinal tract of pigs. He's coming in, he's close to retirement, but he doesn't mind coming in and giving us all his track record. You really can shore up the weaknesses in your own track record and underwrite the feasibility of the proposal. And I have to say, I've used this trick several times. I had a proposal on type 3 secretion, looking at the effects of bacterial proteins on eukaryotic cell biology. I knew about the bacterial side, but I didn't know anything about eukaryotic cell biology. I happened to get in Laura Macheski, who was working here at the time, who was a world expert on eukaryotic cell biology. And as soon as she was on the proposal, that's it. It just gets waved. Oh yes, so the cell biology is fine. It's covered. Steve Busby is another person. He's an FRS in the School of Biosciences. I put in a proposal with him, wanting to look at gene regulation or in regard to a particular secretion system. I know all about the secretion system, but my track record in gene regulation, not so brilliant, whereas he is an FRS. I've not yet found a Nobel laureate that will collaborate with me, but if you can find one, obviously they are the person to put on your grant. Now, at several points in this talk, I will point out that there are kind of ethical issues, and there's a line which you should not cross, and you have to wrestle with your own conscience as to how far you go towards that line if you do cross it. Obviously, you can just get people who are going to do nothing for your proposal. You just put them down as a guest applicant or a guest collaborator in full understanding that they're not going to do anything materially, but their name is so strong and so heavy that they will just see it through. I think if you really know that they're not going to do anything, and everyone agrees that they're not really doing anything, he's kind of lying. But, if there's a good chance, more than 50% chance they will actually make some material contribution, even if you're not absolutely certain they're going to be there every day, every week, every month putting in a contribution, then I think it's acceptable to drag them in. But as I say, that's a matter of your conscience to work out where you draw that line. You've got to get out and mix. You've got to get the trust of your peers. You can't just sit there in your office, write your grant, your first grant, and then expect it to get funded. You've got to spend time kind of doing the shoe leather stuff, going to conferences, not just going to the conference, but go to the bar Even if you're a Muslim, you can go and drink Coca-Cola in the bar, mix with people, talk to them, get to know who they are, get to know them in a relaxed environment, get gossip from them and so forth. Go off and do a sabbatical, get a research leave fellowship. Another thing you can do, and put it down here, is you can go and give seminars in other people's institutions, and you can actively seek that out. You know, you meet someone from Nottingham at the conference and say, I've never been to the University of Nottingham, do you want to invite me to your seminar program? You go along, you give a seminar. There might be some guy at the University of Nottingham who's sitting on the panel reviewing your grant. He gets to see you as a rounded, lively, interesting individual, and that all helps. In the last few years, we have Twitter and blogging as options for actually building a reputation as well. Many people would say these are just frippery of rubbish, nonsense, like Facebook. You know, shouldn't be doing it. The counter argument is that actually there are some people out there who make serious reputations using Twitter and blogging. They get big followings as scientists, as experts. And perhaps not for getting grants, but if you want to recruit fellows into your lab, they have a young mindset. If they see you on Twitter and they see you blogging, they start to think of you as an expert and they want to come and work with you. So that's worth doing as well. Now, another one of these kind of shadow line issues is working with a foreign collaborator. If I have a collaboration with someone in the USA, and we both want to get our first grant on the pig, what lives in a pig gut, let's say, and he has grown 10 organisms from the pig gut, and I've grown 10 organisms from the pig gut, I put him down as a collaborator on my grant. I can say in my pilot work, we have 20 organisms. So I've got twice as much pilot data as I would have had if I'd have just been working alone. The shadow line issue of whether you cross this line is that you can actually apply for very similar kinds of projects, but you can rest assured that you're going through completely different organisations. He'll go to the NSF and I'll go to the BBSRC. We know they won't use the same reviewers. The chances of anyone saying, actually, these people are doing the same work in two different countries is very low. Of course, it is wrong to double dip, to ask for the funding to do exactly the same work, to ask for funding for that from two different organisations. But again, there is this grey area where if you're doing overlapping work, not exactly the same, and he's going to NSF, you're going to BBSRC, you can work together synergistically to mutual benefit. One issue about getting grants is what kind of strategy in terms of how many do you write and how do you submit within a certain period of time. And if you look at ecology and reproductive strategies, there are different kinds of strategies that animals use. A mouse will have litters like this, spray out a dozen offspring at a time. An elephant will produce just one offspring. The elephant will invest over a year in producing that one offspring. The mouse will put a few weeks' work into producing this many. Which is the correct response to the environment you're in? Well, I think my understanding of the ecology is that this is the best strategy if you have a very unpredictable environment. If you don't know you're going to survive for more than a few weeks, you just spray out offspring. A bit like that Monty Python sketch where the woman's doing the washing and the babies are flopping out. That's the sort of approach you need to adopt to make sure that one of them survives to adulthood. And the same is true with grants. If we're in a situation where maybe a panel will have 100 grants, maybe 25, maybe 50 of them are not really fundable, but still 50 that are fundable. And if they can only fund 15% or 20%, it's still a matter of luck as to whether your fundable grant actually gets funded to some degree. It turns on the merest of things, the slightest of differences. And in that situation, if you're treating it as a lottery, the more tickets you buy, the more chance you've got of winning. One approach you can use here to get more grants, to buy more tickets, is to kind of clone out grants. So I could say I want to look at the pig gut, and I write a proposal about that, and then I think, actually, the pig and the horse, they're not that different. I could use pretty much all the same words to describe the horse. I might write a few more paragraphs of introduction to say, I don't know, horses are interesting because there's a multi-billion dollar industry of horse racing and thoroughbreds rather than they're pigs and we eat them. But all the biology that we're going to do downstream is going to be the same. So the cost of writing 2 grants is not twice as much as writing 1 grant. It might be 1.5 or 1.25 times as much effort, but the more you do that, the more chance you've got of getting funding. Now, what about the elephant strategy? Well, the elephant strategy, if the grants are not, if grants are failing because they're poor quality, then maybe this K strategy of producing one offspring and investing lots of effort into it may be more suitable. I'm not sure about this. There is a certain quality threshold. So there's no point in cloning out lots of grants and writing loads of grants if each one of them's failing because they're just not quite fundable. They're 80%, 90% fundable, but they're not quite over the cut-off. And so, I mean, we're currently having a lot of discussion about this, and I think it's now settled on the idea that people should be writing high-quality applications, and these should be internally peer-reviewed and pass the quality threshold. I think that the point is you should get to the stage where you can write fundable grants easily, and then once you're at that stage, write as many as you can, as much as you have energy to write. But if you're not quite good enough at writing grants, if your peers are telling you this is not going to pass muster, then you do have to spend some time getting that good before you do it. So, it's an interesting debate. There's a colleague of mine, well, I employed him actually as a lecturer in Belfast, Ian Henderson. He wrote 17 grant proposals in his first year of employment. They weren't all project grants, but that gives you a measure of one extreme behaviour where you really are trying hard, trying your best to get grant funding. Okay, when you get started, you've got to look over. It's a bit like doing an exam question. Read the question, look at the forms. What are they asking for? Read the instructions. They're not. There's going to be an allowance in terms of pages. BBSSC will be say 6 pages. They'll tell you what font size to use. They'll tell you what are allowable expenses. So if you say I want to go to Rio de Janeiro twice a year, just to have a scoping exercise to see if I can see any pigs on the street or something, they're not going to allow that sort of stuff. There is some wiggle room. There are little tricks you can play, but they're best used sparingly. So you can, if you go into Word, you can actually alter the character spacing. So if you get to the stage where you've got 6.5 pages of text and you have sweated blood and you're only allowed 6 pages, you can go in and you can change the character spacing to 0.8, let's say, and suddenly, magically, it all appears within 6 pages. There is a narrow window between doing that and actually then rendering your text less readable. But I can assure you there is a small gap where nobody notices and you can save space. You should talk to the grants officers at the Research Council, particularly if there's any points of confusion, things about remit. There's no point if I apply to a panel that says we have investment from the Jewish and Muslim community, we support all sorts of research on animals and food animals apart from pigs. There's no point in going in and writing a grant proposal to study the pig. So make sure that you. But they could say, well, if you treat the pig as a companion animal rather than a food animal, we might allow that. You go in and you have an argument about the remit. Vietnamese pot-bellied pigs as pets, big business. Maybe you can get funding to look at the gut microbiota of a Vietnamese pot-bellied pig, as long as you're not going to eat it. I'm making a lot of this stuff go along, talk rubbish, but there we go. So check with it. The other thing is that you're not dealing with a machine. You shouldn't think of this huge, great kind of monstrous machine out there that is the Research Council. There are humans in the apparatus. And if you actually speak to them as humans, you'll often get a human response. So if you've spoken to them about stuff, they know who you are. If it turns out that you didn't tick a particular box, they're more likely to send the thing back to, oh, you forgot to tick that box. Whereas if you treat them as some kind of idiot or some kind of robot in your communications, they might think, what an arsehole, he hasn't ticked that box, oh, I can throw this grant in the bin. And it doesn't have to go forward. So, you know, what goes around comes around, remember that. Okay, when you're getting around to writing the proposal, this is a hard thing to do. We kind of live in an age of distraction and attention deficit and so forth, but writing a proposal requires a long period of concentration. You can't write a proposal for 20 minutes, then go and do something else, and then write a bit more for 20 minutes. At least I can't, and I don't think most people can. You have to sit down and spend a whole day, 8 hours, writing a proposal. Some people talk about this Pomodoro technique, where you get a little timer that you use in the kitchen, and you set that for 25 minutes, and you write for 25 minutes, and then that goes off, and you're allowed to get up, walk about, look out the window. You've got 5 minutes, then you sit down and do another 25 minutes. It's hard, you know. Until you get into the zone, it's hard to do it, but you have to do it. Don't look at email. Just turn off your email. I mean, to me, the worst distraction of the day is email, because emails keep coming in, and oh, there I was in the middle of something, and then someone sends this email and saying, oh, you know, whatever, will you be coming to this meeting next week, or you know, can you comment on this proposal? You know, just forget it. Don't look at Twitter. I look at Twitter once or twice a day. Some of my staff have Twitter as a streaming feed across the screen all the time. You can't have that and write a grant. You shouldn't think you could. Just turn it off. And basically, you have to be a grumpy old git. You have to just say to people, look, bugger off. I'm writing a grant. I'm not talking to you. I don't care how urgent your stuff is. This is my priority for the moment. When I say pretend to be, I don't have to pretend I am a grumpy old git. You may have to run an emulation program to make yourself a grumpy old git. But just get that proposal written. You may want to work at home. Obviously, if you have preschool kids, or even if you have kids at school, that's an issue, because if, you know, at school they'll come back at 3:30 and disturb you. It is an option to avoid being interrupted by your colleagues, because there is that temptation to talk to people in the corridor. People knock on the door. Oh, you just got a minute, and you say, oh, what? And then half an hour later you get back to it. You just have to force yourself to do it. It's a discipline. You have to keep going. So this is where I'm talking about what my experience with the way in which you write them for BBSRC. It may be that things are slightly different for different research councils, but we have a case for support one where you have to talk about the track record and the environment and so forth. So you have to talk about your track record and reputation. You should not be modest. You should be bigging it up for yourself and saying how wonderful you are, but you must be evidence-based. You mustn't say, I am the foremost expert in the country on the epidemiology of, the genomic epidemiology of hospital pathogens, and just leave it like that. You have to say, as evidenced by recent invitations to international bodies to run conference sessions on this, or something such like that, so that you're not just making statements that could be challenged, that seem to be matters of opinion. It's always underpinned by evidence. You should be aiming for brand name recognition, though, so that when someone picks up your proposal, they know who you are. You know, they've either seen you on Twitter, or you've written a blog, or you've written a review article, which recently. So even if you haven't actually got money to do research, if you write a good, well-written review article, you're getting visibility in your discipline. Then you have to stress why. So first question is why you, and what's great about you. The second thing is what's great about the place. So you have to stress how feasible it is to do the work in your environment. Look around and see what's happened that's good lately, that's made it better for you to work where you are. So if labs have been refurbished, you can say, oh, the School of Biosciences has recently, in the last year, undertaken £200,000 worth of laboratory refurbishment. Again, it's a matter of conscience, if they refurbish labs on the other side of the building from where you are, it's nothing to do with you, whether you mention it or not, well, that's a matter of conscience. But that kind of stuff that shows that there is vigour going on, that there's a living, happening kind of environment, that's all useful. And all these things here. Skills and achievements, all that kind of stuff you've got to do. Data release is one of the things that they seem to make a lot of these days. Generally, I don't think grants will fall. They won't throw them out if your data release statement isn't perfect. They will get a bit fed up if you don't make any effort at all. But one of the things that in modern zeitgeist is obviously that open access, open source, make everything you can available to the public in a nice, easy, friendly way. Probably the quickest way of getting this done is to actually ask around, and someone who's written a grant similar to yours say, well, what did your data release statement look like? Can I just borrow some of your text? Okay, case for support 2, the actual what are you going to do and why. You need to look at the criteria that are used by the referees and the panel. And so these are some of the things that they look for. So they look for things like originality. So there's no point in putting a proposal to, I want to be the first person to do a comprehensive census of the pig gut microbiome. Turns out that someone in Yale published a paper in PNAS 2 months ago that I just haven't bothered to read. The panel's not going to look very well on that. You're going to be sunk. And you can expect the reviewers to do their own PubMed searches. You can't imagine, you shouldn't think that, they're just a bunch of old bumbling fools. They won't notice that paper came out from Yale a couple of months ago. They will. They're not stupid. They know how to use Google. They know how to use PubMed or Web of Science. They can type in pig microbiome sequencing and they will find that paper. Timeless and promise. So you have to stress why does this have to be done now? Okay, we have, in my case, say I haven't actually written a proposal about pigs, but say I was going to, I'd say, we have this new opportunity because we have this wonderful new technology that's just arrived on campus that allows us to do more sequencing than we ever could have done before. So we will get, we have this wonderful opportunity to get the first definitive catalogue of what's in that gut of that pig. And then this promises to give us lots of new insights into pig nutrition or other things and so forth. Strategic relevance. What does the funding body say about its priority area? So this is, if you can reach a funding body, they will say, well, we're interested in this and this and this and this and this, half a dozen things. If you can actually state in your proposal, this speaks to priority area food security, BBSRC priority area food security, let's say, or technology development or whatever, and you're just doing their work for them. So instead of the reviewer having to work and the panel member having to work to say, well, it is relevant, you've told them and they just tick the box. Impact on health and wealth. Again, evidence-based stuff here that's where you can make a good statement, say, this disease kills 1 million people a year, it's clearly important. Or, there are, whatever, I don't know how many pigs there are in the country, there are 70 million pigs in the United Kingdom every day, and 300,000 of them are eaten, whatever. You're actually making something, instead of saying the pig's an important animal, you're giving a concrete figure that really provides the evidence. You should be writing a tightly argued case in your background to the work. You're not there to show that you know everything there is to know. You're not writing an encyclopedia article on the pig or whatever. You don't have to have an encyclopedic knowledge. It's basically you have to be able to articulate, this is what we know already. This is the grounds for thinking that there is a body of work that needs to be done. Either we have a new technology or there's an unanswered question. There are 5 hypotheses and we don't know which one's right. You have to articulate it in that way. And therefore, you have to give us this money. It's self-evident, isn't it? We need to know which of those 5 hypotheses is true. Otherwise, people will die or there will be huge loss of money or whatever. You have to just make that case. Again, as a Machiavellian thing, if you know who's likely to review it and you know who's likely to be on the panel, make sure you cite their work. Because if you write something and it's relevant to what they're doing and you haven't cited their work, they're going to get very pissed off and they'll say, who is this oik? And they won't want to, they'll just take against you and they'll find any reason they can to do you down. Stress the achievements, again, this is a bit like the case for support 1, but you can thread a little bit of this into the proposal as well, things like that. Very important to have some pilot work or proof of principle experiments to show feasibility. Now, sometimes you can make this a bit contrived. You can say, well, we've done loads of work on the chicken gut. Not going to be that much different from the pig gut. We're putting that in as pilot work. We never touched a pig, but we want to do this. We did this, actually. I got a grant on chicken gut, and the only pilot work that had been done was on dogs, on dog gut. And we said we were going to do some chicken gut experiments. We never did them before the grant got funded even, but we got the money anyway. So you can find a way in which you can actually repitch something you're already doing and got there as pilot work. Again, this is a matter of conscience. If you get in the right collaborators, you might just be able to borrow a whole body of work that someone else is doing and underwrite an issue, get rid of a problem that way. Sometimes you can get grants without having done pilot work, but I wouldn't try it as a general principle. It's best to have something in there to show, something to the effect that we want to do 200 experiments. We've done one of this kind of experiment, and we're confident we could do 199 others, so just give us the money for that. We've shown we can do one, the rest of it's just painting by numbers. That kind of approach works a lot better than saying it's actually easy to do this experiment and we propose to do 200. We've never actually done one, but it is easy, honestly, or people have done it in the literature but not us. That doesn't quite, the reviewer might say, well, they say it's very easy to clone that gene into that vector, but I haven't seen any evidence from what they're doing. These kind of issues play out. Get clear the aims and objectives of the work. So what are you going to do? Why are you going to do it? What are the objectives? How will you measure success against those objectives? There's a lot of discussion about philosophy of science in this kind of area, like, should you have a hypothesis? Should we be like Popper and say that we're testing a hypothesis? Or should we just be, like Francis Bacon, just collect the data from the outside world and watch the patterns fall out without any constraints like that? Generally, people like to have a hypothesis. They like to see it articulate. If you can articulate your work in terms of there are 2 or 3 possible explanations for these events, hypothesis 1, 2, and 3, that's better. But in my area, in genomics, just sequencing a genome is worth doing. Sequencing a microbiome, it's worth doing because, it's a bit like mapping a new continent. It's still a useful exercise. The reviewers will dismiss those kind of exercises as fishing expeditions or stamp collecting. Those are the 2 phrases that are used to damn those kind of grant proposals. There's a quote here that says, if you're going to fish, it's best to do so in teeming waters with finest equipment and flawless technique. In effect, if you're going to go on a fishing expedition, you don't go along to the pond with a fishing rod. You take some dynamite, chuck it in the pond and kill all the fish and drag them all out. And that way nobody can say you're missing any tricks there. Hypothesis-driven research obviously goes down well, but in some ways data collection projects are less risky. You may or may not be able to prove a hypothesis, but you know that this organism in front of you has a genome sequence, and it's just a matter of turning the handle of extracting the DNA, making the library, sequencing the genome, and doing it. So you have to balance up these 2 different forces actually in the argument as to which way you go, whether you go with hypothesis-driven or stamp collecting. How are we doing for time? I better go a bit faster actually. So proposal, the panel will have lots and lots of proposals. Do not think that anyone is interested in your proposal particularly. It's not like they're reading a novel for fun or whatever. They have to plough through loads of these. The panel will get through 60 proposals or more, sometimes up to 100 proposals. The introducing member may have half dozen proposals to wade through as the primary introducing member, and they may have to read some more as a secondary member. So they don't want to see spelling mistakes. They don't want to see all this trouble with typography, grammar and style. If they're in a sense they're looking to find a reason to get rid of you, to put you down. And if you are a bit sloppy in the way you do this kind of stuff, they'll say, well, you're sloppy in your science. Use your word processor to its full potential. Never ever use underline. That is an abomination. It looks ugly. If you look at any professionally produced TypeScript, anything that's produced, a journal, a newspaper, a magazine, you'll never see underline used. Underline's a hangover from the days of the typewriter, and it makes the page look cluttered and horrible. So don't use underline. Look at, you know, change the font size, change the font, use bold, use underline, use italics, but don't use underline. Use plenty of white space. One of the big problems when you're faced with a proposal, if you have a whole page that is just one paragraph, you immediately get, the readers get an intellectual indigestion. They just, oh my God, I don't want to read that. I've got 12 of these buggers. You know, I've got 2 hours before Coronation Street's on. I've got to get through this. I'm dying for a glass of wine. I don't want to read that bloody whole page like that. You know, so avoid this kind of wall of words phenomenon. Break up the text with headings, figures, bulleted lists, lines. Use a ragged left-hand margin. People always think, oh, well, they have to have it nice column like that. It's actually harder to read that way. It's nice if you have, easier on the eye if you have it a ragged margin there on that side. Some people feel that they're on such pressure for space that they squunch down all the references and they just put them in a kind of bolus at the end of the thing. Well, the reviewer, you say, nobody, Smith and Jones did this study on the pig microbiome in 1974, but it was highly flawed because they didn't do this. But the reviewer happens to be one of their friends. Like, oh, I want to read that paper. And if they can't actually see where that evidence trail is, if they have to actually, if they have to go in and actually type in the citation information and work hard, they may dislike that. If they can actually see the type, oh, it's a paper in Nature, or it was a paper in the Journal of Poultry Science or something, they can make a judgment on the references. Highlight the things that matter. Create your own PDF rather than let the website do it. So that, because sometimes you might create a Word document, shove it up, it turns it into a PDF. Your Word document was 6 pages, suddenly it turns to 6.5 pages because of some weirdness. Much nicer if you control it by creating your own PDF and uploading it for those. Here is one of my proposals from a few years ago, and it's just to show you the kind of layout on the page, to say the points I was making, so that here I've used a horizontal line. It's not underlined, it's a horizontal line that you can find in Word under the images thing that you can insert. Questions to be addressed, background, some nice diagrams in there, pictures to break up the text so it doesn't look like a wall of words. Nice bits of white space between sections, headings, use of bold just so that someone can... Because typically what happens is they'll read these proposals a few days or a week or two before the panel meeting, and then they're on the train on the way there, they might want to just speed read them and they just quickly want to get... So anything that helps them, just quickly get through that and work out what's in it. Here's another one. This is the chicken grant. Again, looking at just looking at the way it's laid out, got ragged margin here, lots of white space. Where you're a bit squashed, sometimes if you've got a horizontal line, you can actually create this break in the page, but not have to give up so much white space. So that's another trick you can use. Having bulleted lists that are indented like this, again, it breaks it up so it's easier to digest. In fact, you can't quite read this, but there's quite a lot of... well, you know, you're writing this introductory stuff in a kind of New Scientist-y journalistic way. So it says the domestic chicken occupies a special place in science and society. It's the most common domesticated animal, the most important food production animal, and the most abundant and widely distributed bird in the world. You know, you're establishing the importance of what you're dealing with, just so that someone can't say, well, chickens aren't important, are they? You should be working on Drosophila. Do not blind your reader with technical detail. Now, again, this is a particular issue with the BBSSC. TLDR stands for too long, didn't read. So if stuff is too long, it's just I can tell you, I was on a panel. When you get this stuff which is indigestible, you just think, oh, I can't be bothered with this. I'll score that down. I just can't bother to read it all to the end. You've got to, you have to have a narrative that engages the reader. So they start on page 1, think, yeah, 2, oh yeah, and they want to read to page 3 and 4. If by the end of page 2 they're already thinking, oh, I don't like this proposal, you've lost it. So one trick that what I do, I think if you think about, there's an introducing member who's not going to be an expert in your field. They'll be kind of generally an expert. So for some, they might be a microbiologist, but they won't know about genome sequencing of microbes or metagenomics or whatever. So you have to sell it to them. You have to explain, oh, so genomes are important because, and the metagenome is important because. You have to spell it out. You might sort of think, well, they must know that. If they don't know that, they shouldn't be looking at my proposal. Well, the introducing member is not in that situation. The reviewers, you can expect they will know that stuff. And there is this question, well, if you don't put enough, if you don't tell them what pH the buffer is in your gel tank, then the reviewer is going to say, well, I can't tell whether this whole program will work because of that. Well, with the BBSSC, if the reviewer says that, you have a chance to respond to the reviewers and say, sorry, we didn't say this. We will run and the buffer will be at 6.3. Sorry, we didn't spell this out. But if you write everything, all that technical stuff into your proposal, the introducing member, who's only got superficial interest in this, superficial, will just get lost in the technical, kind of lose interest and start to take against you. So it's very important to titrate those two things against each other with how much technical detail and how much readability and general interest there is. If you push for space, the other thing with these proposals is the case for support is just one document. There may be summaries, impact statements, justification, where some of the material that you've, in your first draft, the case for support, you think, well, I can't fit that in here, but actually I could just take that out and put that in the impact statement, or I can put that in the summary and make the same point somewhere else in the document. You've really got to act like a salesman with these proposals. So, as I say, most of the introducing member won't be a real expert. Some of the referees might not actually be experts. So you have to have a kind of elevator pitch. You have to try and think about how you'd sell this to a colleague in the bar. Let's say you're sitting at a conference and they said, what do you want to work on? I said, I want to work on the pig gut. And they said, what on earth do you want to work on that for? And then you say, well, it's because it's a very important animal and nobody's ever done it before, and we may be able to improve, the health and wealth of nations by improving the health and wealth of pigs, and blah, blah, blah. You come up with some line like that, and because we have access to this latest sequencer, we can do it better than anyone else. That's all you need. You need to have colourful turns of phrase. It's a fine line, because I wrote a proposal, one of those ones I showed you. I wrote it the first draft. I thought, I've done all right. I took it to a panel member who happened to work in Birmingham. So he is conflicted. He can't actually review that proposal. He can't be in the room when it's being reviewed, but he knows how the panel thinks. So I said to him, what do you think? If that went to the panel, what do you think? He said, just tell me what you want to do. And I told him. He said, well, now you've told me verbally, and I look at what you've written, it's much clearer verbally. You need to go and rewrite this as if you were telling me verbally like that. I went away and did that, rewrote the proposal. He said that the introducing member really loved the proposal and was in the bar was saying he really wanted it to succeed. 3 out of the 4 reviewers said, oh, this is lovely. 1 out of the 4 reviewers said, this does not read like a serious scientific proposal. It reads more like a sales document. So you can't please all the people all the time. I lost 1 out of 4 reviewers, but nonetheless I still got the grant by going that way. I've forgotten I put this in. So this is just that introduction to that thing. So it just shows you the sort of thing that I put in. And you want to put in quirky little things that will stick in the reader's mind. The idea that Apollo astronauts even ate chicken stew on the moon. It's the sort of thing that they will say, I never thought of that. It's interesting, and it sticks in their mind, rather than it all just being faceless stuff. Have to go fast. You've got 10 minutes of stuff, haven't you? I have to go really fast then. 5. All right. Another important thing is that you can actually persuade people with the words you use in a kind of hidden way. And so experiments have been done where it's in one of those Malcolm Gladwell books where they take a room like this and they divide it in half. These people get given a load of words to memorise, like old, senescent, senile, grumpy, and these people get young, virile, exciting. And they showed that these people on this side, when they walk out the room, they walk out of the room slowly and stooped, and these people go out with a spring in their stride. All they were told to do was memorise the words. They weren't told to anything about but so basically words, the kind of language and the emotional tone of the language you use has an impact on the reader. And what you need to do is kind of slip into that gap between thoughts, as you might call it, that kind of, you want to manipulate them unconsciously. If they realise that you're overdoing it, then you've lost it. It's a bit like seduction, really. I mean, you've got to get there into their head with these kind of words. Rich, timely, fascinating, enthusiastic, interesting. You know, it's all got to come out in your text. If you say, this is a mildly interesting piece of work that might someday have some influence on something important, perhaps, you know, you're not going to get funded. So there's the same sort of thing in a Wordle. But I've covered most of those points. I use, when I'm dealing with bits of work, I call them tasks and subtasks. Some people call them work packages. But again, it gives you a chance to actually talk about the chunks of things you're doing in concrete terms. I've spoken about fishing expeditions and stamp collecting as put-downs. Another put-down is this proposal is over-ambitious and unfocused. The reviewer doesn't even have to have read it. They can just say that. And I think, you know, that's it, I don't like that because it's over. They don't have to, so you have to try and avoid that. Don't try and be all things to all people. Actually say, well, we're going to do this, but we recognise we can't do this as well. We'd like to do this as well, but we can't in this 3 years do that as well. We're going to draw a line here and be clear about that. And even if sometimes you might say, I'm going to do 5 things. I'm going to try and do 5 things. But even if I only do 4 of them, I'll have made a big step forward. So, you know, don't get too picky about whether 5 is too ambitious or not. Don't rely on a linear progression of things. So if you say I'm going to do task A, B, C, D, if task B and C cannot take place until task A is finished, any canny reviewer will say, well, hang on, what if they don't get task A to work? You've got 6 months to get that to work, 2.5 years following. What are they going to do with that 2.5 years if task A never works? So you have to have parallel strands. You have to have mitigating strategies. If approach A doesn't work, we'll use approach B. Now, obviously, you can't overdo the caveats and everything you say, well, if this doesn't work, we'll do this, and if that doesn't work, we'll do that, and that. You know, there are limits. But if you just say, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and you expect it all to work, people will say you're naive. Use evidence, use language that expresses confidence. So don't say, we will try very hard to clone this gene into this vector. You say, we will clone this gene into this vector. You need, the linguists talk about the distinction between given and new information. So you mustn't assume that the reader knows everything that you know. You have to put yourself in their shoes and say, what do they know? So you don't say, we'll use Fred Blogg's method to do this. If the average person doesn't know who Fred Bloggs is, you've got to say, well, Fred Bloggs, who is a protein crystallographer, works at the University of Oxford, and has just come up with this new way of doing things. You have to explain that. The reader won't know all that. It's in your head, but you have to project yourself into the reader's head. Timetables, goals, Gantt charts, meetings. Try and express synergy. I mean, I put this one I put in one of mine where you make it all look snazzy, so it impresses people. Don't ask for too much in consumables, but don't ask for too little as well. I'm going to run out of time. Another issue is that it's hard to get the staff, and it's hard to get funding for staff. So what you can do is, if you can find someone who might want to be employed on this grant, then put their name down. This will underwrite the grant because they'll say, oh, we know it's very hard to get a bioinformatician, but they do have the ideal candidate in Fred Bloggs. It also means Fred Bloggs is probably already employed as a postdoc at Spina Point 10 or whatever, So you can put down spinal point 10 on the grant instead of it defaulting to the lowest, which I think is spinal point 7. You're walking this ethical shadow line because what happens if Fred Blogg says, well, I might take that grant, but I might not. I might go to Australia. Well, what do you do then? I take the view that if there's a reasonable chance he will, if not certain but reasonable, then it's okay. If you know that he is going to go to Australia and you're just using his name and his CV, I think that probably is the wrong side of the divide. Justification, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, again, if you want to inflate salaries, you can say, you know, we're fortunate in recruiting this person who has just the right skill set, and we need to ask for this inflated salary. We need this piece. Well, we have a PCR. We already have a PCR machine in the building, but there are 12 other users, and it never stops being used. And really, we need to do so much work on this that we need our own PCR machine. Because one of the things that the reviewers will say, well, surely you must have one of those in the department already, and they might try and cut that off you. Get your first draft reviewed by colleagues. Try and get someone who's like the introducing member, someone who's a colleague who doesn't work in your area but is just sufficiently knowledgeable to get the vague idea. As I mentioned before, if you can get someone who's on the panel who happens to work here, that's the best thing because they will know exactly how the panel works, but they won't be able to be in the room when yours is done. Writing the proposal and the case for support is one thing. Getting all the bloody boxes ticked and the paperwork done and the costings calculated, that's a separate issue. And in fact, you can do those things in parallel. And if, in fact, you're putting yourself a hostage fortune if you say, I'm going to write the proposal, lock myself away, and then I'm going to look at the costings. It's best to try and get those things. And my understanding is we're looking towards a system where a lot of that stuff can be offloaded onto someone else in the future. So as a scientist, you write the science, and someone else goes off and fills in all those boxes for you. I'm sorry I've overrun. I don't know quite how I've overrun this time. I didn't overrun this much before, but anyway, I've prattled on too much. Getting peer review. They'll ask you often to nominate peer reviewers. The people you want are people that you know very well, mates of yours, you've had a drink with them, but you haven't actually collaborated with them recently. I think the BBSRC rule last week was you haven't collaborated with them in the last 4 years. So it's someone you're university with, or you did a PhD with. You see them every now and then at a conference, and they're very supportive of what you do, but they're not compromised. So you take someone who's just on the edge of being compromised as a reviewer. That's the perfect reviewer because they're your mate and they will give a good review for you. But because you haven't collaborated with them, they can't be challenged. It may be hard to find people you've had no dealings with whatsoever. So if you are concerned and you find someone and you certainly don't know if that person's good enough, well, the reviewer can say, well, actually, I have a grant proposal under review with this guy, but I've not actually written any papers with him recently, or we have a kind of project student together or something like that. They can declare that to the panel, and the panel can say, we consider that a conflict, or we don't. So they can still write a review for you, but leave it to the panel to decide whether they're conflicted. And another bit of Machiavellian thinking, if you have enemies or competitors in the field, there are ways in which you can compromise their ability to peer review it in a harsh, nasty way. So if there's some bastard who you really don't like, and you know that they will try and do you down, you do a number of things. One is you ask them to come in and collaborate with you, if you can stomach it. If you really, they're bastards, but you're going to see them only twice a year because that's all it requires, then do that. If you can't actually think of a way of them collaborating, you can ask them to sit on the steering group. If your project is big enough to require a steering group, you can say, come and sit on the steering group. And then they're compromised. They won't be able to review that proposal, so that way they're out of the way. Or if necessary, declare that there's a conflict. Say this person slept with my wife and they can't possibly give well, no, in fact, I slept with his wife and he can't possibly give a fair summary of my grant proposal. And say that in your stuff. I haven't slept with anyone's wife apart from my own. Use your right to reply to reviewers' comments. So with the BBSRC, you get a chance to respond. You should do that. Don't just ignore it. Accentuate the positive and try and fill in the gaps. If you've done some more work on the project since you sent the proposal in, say we did one experiment and we want to do 199. In fact, we've done another 5 now. We really are confident we can do this, so give us the money for 195. That kind of stuff. How much more have I got? Let's have a look. So, yeah, so you put it in, comes back, the panel makes a review, makes recommendations. Some proposals, they'll immediately say, yeah, funded, or nope, not funded. Sometimes it has to go to some other body to be ratified. It used to be called Strategy Board at VBSSC. I've forgotten what it's called now. You can get spies on the committee to tell you how it's gone. If you do that, you're compromising them. Depends how much you care about that, how much they care about that, because the rules are they're not supposed to tell anyone what's got. It's like a jury. You're not supposed to tell about anything about what went on in that room. The research councils will lean heavy on them, but you know, you might get inside information, so you can go and drown your sorrows earlier or celebrate your success a bit earlier than you might otherwise. The point is that the decision is non-negotiable. There's no point in going back to the panel and say, you must be wrong, BBSRC, you've misjudged this. This is outrageous, I'm writing to my MP about this. You know, there's no point in that. They made their decision, it was a lottery, you lost, and you go and buy your next ticket for the next week's game. If you're successful, you've got to get started, get the money. Getting the money is just a start. You've got to get all the other things done. You have to deliver. If you don't succeed, find out why. Often you can get feedback from the panel, from one of the grants officers. They may tell you, it's just sorry, it was a very competitive round. They may say, well, it went down because there wasn't any pilot data, or the proposal felt that you hadn't quite made the importance, stressed the importance of peaks in the UK economy. Or they might say, well, you know, sorry, it was just considered an unfocused, unfundable project. Go away. If there are faults, you can rectify them and you can reapply. You're not allowed to resubmit usually, but there are rules about this. I think a figure has been mentioned, 25% of it has to be different. You can actually take a grant proposal, break it down, and then resubmit it somewhere else. And this happens all the time. First law of grant thermodynamics: no grant proposal ever created or destroyed, merely recycled to a different funding agency or purpose. So that's it. I slightly overrun a bit. So no more excuses, no more philosophising, no more navel gazing. Find out the deadline, scrutinise the form, write the grant, seize the day.